after a recession that stole 8 million jobs. This is going to take some time. GM and Chrysler went through painful restructurings, ones that required enormous sacrifices on the part of all involved. Many believe this was a fool's errand. But 1 year later, the outlook is very different. In fact, the industry is recovering at a pace few thought possible. New York City this week and addressed an audience that included leaders in the financial industry. And once again, I called for reforms to hold Wall Street accountable and to protect consumers. These reforms would put an end, once and for all, to taxpayer bailouts. They would bring greater transparency to complex financial dealings. And they will empower ordinary consumers and shareholders in our financial system.
When government comes in and decides who the winners are, who the losers are, and there's no recourse. That's what happened to 3,400 dealerships across the country. That's one example of gangster government. If we look at the new federal regulation bill that's in front of us that Barney Frank, Chris Dodd want to pass, that's also gangster government. That's the government also deciding who's going to win, who's going to lose on Wall Street.
My next guest is a fierce proponent of free markets and small government, and she's recently been defending her characterization of the Obama administration and the Democratic leadership in Congress generally as a gangster government. Republican Congresswoman Michele Bachmann of Minnesota joins me tonight from St. Paul. Delighted to see you, Congresswoman. So do you wish you used different characterization? Is gangster government really appropriate?
Well, what I wish is that the federal government would not have created the automobile task force, where the federal government literally overnight rendered 3,400 car dealerships privately owned, almost all of them viable, rendered them virtually worthless overnight. The federal government stole private assets from private individuals. People owned these car dealerships. Their customer lists were taken away from them. Their customer service lists were taken away from them. And people were stuck with debts, stuck with parts from GM and Chrysler, and told, tough it out, baby. You're done. You have to put up the out of business sign. And that's what happened.
I thought
people
that decision was made by the car
away.
companies, though, Congresswoman. Am I wrong about that? Wasn't it General Motors and Chrysler and Ford that made those decisions?
It was, well, remember who owns General Motors. It's now Government Motors. It's owned by the federal government. The same with Chrysler. It was restructured, and now the federal government is calling the shots, and the federal government has a large ownership stake. And as a matter of fact, the federal government overturned 150 years of bankruptcy law and took assets held by bondholders. Those are the investors in Chrysler. Their assets were taken away and given over to the UAW, the unsecured creditor. So the people who took less interest and put money into Chrysler had their rights taken away from them legally and given to people who were unsecured, and they were given rights. So these are moves that are not in line with the rule of law or with the sanctity of contract. That's what's made the United States a very good place to do business, because we believe in the sanctity of contract. Right. We believe in the rule of law. That's been denied in the last 18 months. All the rules of the game in business has changed.
Let me. Is there anything wrong? What exactly is the better question? Don't you feel you're going against the tide in the case of financial reform? Don't most Americans want the federal government to step in and while ending the possibility of bailouts, more specifically calling for transparency with these complex derivatives transactions? Isn't that something you're in favor of?
People really hate the bailouts. That's what the American people hate. I voted against the original bailout. This particular financial reform bill does, Geraldo, is it makes bailouts permanent. The only difference is this bill makes bailouts in the hands of the president. They bypass Congress. So on into the future, as far as the eye can see, the Goldman Sachs of the world can make whatever risky bet they want to take. They can glean all the profits when times are fat and good and happy. But when Goldman makes a bad bet, or any other Wall Street firm, well, then the federal government can go ahead and bail them out and stick the bill with the taxpayer. That's exactly what we don't want. So this is bailout 2.0. It's exactly what the American people don't want the federal government to do.
Okay, so Congresswoman, could you stand by? Let me take a quick commercial break.
Sure.
We'll be back with more from Congresswoman Bachmann after this brief intermission.
We have gangster government when the federal government has set up a new cartel. And private businesses now have to go begging with their hand out.
But do you fear, Congresswoman, that the reaction to that gangster stuff might have dimmed your star a bit?
You know, I'm not worried about a star dimming or rising. That's not my point. My point really of concern is what is going to happen to our ability to be able to start businesses, grow businesses, and enjoy the fruits of a free market economy. More and more the government is intervening, just like this financial regulatory bill will do. We talked about the pre-existing bailouts that government is making available to private businesses, but it's worse than that, Geraldo. It's a continuous line of credit that the Treasury Department would give to these private businesses on Wall Street. The other thing is that the federal government would be guaranteeing their debt. So all of these together put the taxpayer on the hook, even more than we were on the hook with Freddie and Fannie, which were at the heart of the financial meltdown. This puts the American taxpayer in a very difficult position going forward. People just need to realize that this is analogous to you telling your college student when they go off to college, don't worry, I am going to have a pre-existing bailout fund for you if you spend too much money. Don't worry if you need more money. You got an open line of credit unending. And by the way, whatever you buy, I'm going to guarantee your debt. That's what this bill would do. We wouldn't do that for our college kids. I wouldn't do this for Wall Street.
The Democrats will dump the $50 billion bailout stuff. The financial reform will pass because it has to. Michele Bachmann, thank you for being with us. Thanks, folks.